And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube video installment of my series Valiant till the last. Today we will be talking about the Book of Death Deluxe hardcover and I will be showing it using a Skycam view. However, before we jump into that, I just wanted to touch on something which I alluded to at the end of last week's video, which is that between that series, which was Eternal Warrior Days of Steel, a short mini-series, very short video, and this video, which is the Book of Death mini-series event, we actually need to reread The Valiant. Now, here it is up on the screen. This is the YouTube video within this current playlist for the Valiant event. Now, I originally read this when I was reading through the Bloodshot thread of comics, and it seemed that the perfect time to read that then because it involves Bloodshot amongst a myriad of other characters, and it also has an impact on the long-term nature or history or circumstances of Bloodshot. And so it was really important to read this before the next actual Bloodshot series. However, based on some sort of cursory desk research that I've done, it seems that reading the Valiant is key to read before you read the Book of Death. And having done this, I can confirm that is the case. The Valiant is something that you need to read before the Book of Death. Whether or not you read it after or around the last two videos we talked about, so the original Eternal Warrior series or Eternal Warrior Days of Steel, as I mentioned in those videos, they're pretty self-contained and standalone, so whether you read them or when you read them doesn't really matter. But for the Book of Death, if you're going to read it, you need to read the Valiant first. Is the Valiant good? Yeah, it's a decent story, decent artwork, lots of characters. It's definitely something you should have as a starting point for reading the Valiant universe. But clearly, it has quite a big impact because not only does it have an impact upon Bloodshot, as we can see, it teases right up into the Book of Death deluxe hardcover. So if you're interested in that, please check out the video in the playlist for the Valiant. Otherwise, I am going to add this into the reading map that I'm kind of building, and I'll see how it kind of fits in. Um, Rereading the Valiant, which is what I did just before reading the Book of Death for the first time, yeah, I enjoyed it just as much the second time round. It is a good comic and it is recommended. But with no further ado, let's jump over into the Skycam view for the Book of Death Deluxe Edition.
Okay, hopefully, if I edited this correctly, you've just seen me talking about the Valiant, the hardcover, which I reread. But now, moving swiftly on, this week's deluxe edition from Valiant is the Book of Death. So this is a massive whale in the sense that it is extraordinarily expensive to get hold of. It's out of print. On the secondary market, this goes for hundreds and hundreds. I think once I checked this, and it was well over £1,200 to buy. I'm very lucky. I managed to purchase this literally in a local comic shop. In fact, I think it was even discounted. I think it was something like £25. So unbelievable value. And I got it whilst it was out of print, so that's astonishing. Enough bragging, let's just dive straight into it. It has the standard Valiant cover from this era, so a top banner, main picture, side banner. Spine, standard, no number because it's a single one-off event. And then the back. This is some pretty awesome artwork. It's not really indicative of the artwork inside the comic, unfortunately. Usual blurbs and stuff in the back. Usual inside flaps, blurb, and then creators. It's got a variety of different creators here listed. It's predominantly a story by Robert Venditti, however. Let's take off the dust jacket and see what this looks like raw. So unusually, this has absolutely zero gloss on it. So what we have here is just what they call an emboss or a deboss. Can you see that? So it's just in there as black. It's not even shiny black. Well, at least not really. It's just debossed into the sort of the buckram cover. And here you have this as well, Book of Death. Okay, unusual choice not to use any kind of foil or blocking on this, but fine. And then, of course, a clean back. Okay, black end pages, kind of fitting for something called the Book of Death. And then let's dive straight into it. So, we have the Book of Death, which collects the following issues in the following order. We have the Book of Death, issue 1. We have the Book of Death, Fall of Bloodshot one-shot. Book of Death, issue 2. The Fall of Ninjak one-shot. Book of Death, issue 3. And then the Fall of Harbinger one-shot, followed by the Fall of Exo Manowar one-shot. And then Book of Death, issue 4. And then it's got some web comics, which I will discuss as I flick through. I do not know, by the way, why this has a different title and formatting to both that and the other two here. So for Bloodshot, Harbinger, and Manowar, it has the actual title of the story and then a subtitle, Book of Death, whatever. Ninjak doesn't do that, and I don't know why, and it's not obvious from reading it either. This may well just be a formatting screw-up by Valiant, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, it's got other credits there for the Book of Death itself. You'll notice that the one-shots, so Bloodshot and so on, are written by the writers at the time of the ongoing series, so Jeff Lemire, Matt Kint, Joshua Dysart, and Robert Venditti, respectively. Okay, so with no further ado, straight into it. So here are the 8 issues. It has them in sequence, these are just the covers. And it starts off with Book of Death, issue 1. So, Book of Death, what is it about? This is a direct follow-up to the Valiant. So the Valiant hardcover, which ideally I just talked about at the start of this video, I have already previously read, and I have done a previous Valiant to the last video talking it through. And in that hardcover, there's some very key events for Bloodshot, but also for the Eternal Warrior, specifically introducing not only Gilad, but also this character here and a few other bits and pieces. Cool image, but if you've been watching my series, you know I'm a massive Roku fan. And yeah, it basically follows on directly from that. And if you haven't read The Valiant, you won't really understand what's going on here. The story itself is 4 single issues. So that's the end of issue 1. And something to keep in mind is that these one-shots that come as part of the wider Book of Death literally don't have to be interspersed the way they are. They could either be read completely separately, or they can be read after the Book of Death, or they could not be read at all. So this one here, The Fall of Bloodshot, we've seen before in one of our Bloodshot Deluxe editions, and it's that same story. And to be honest, the fact that it is a story that's reprinted in the Book of Death, really feel like it has no bearing. All this is a story about Bloodshot in the future. That's all. It could be read as part of this, it could not. There's no particular reason to read it after Book of Death issue 1, but that's just how they've done it. Then we have Book of Death issue 2, which carries straight on from Book of Death issue 1. And this is kind of a cool story, great artwork, great action. I do quite enjoy it. So, yeah, that's pretty solid. Is that pretty solid? Hang on. Is that the entire issue? That is the entire issue. Right. And then we have Fall of Ninjak. Here we have the Fall of Ninjak story, which we've already read in an issue of Ninjak. A lot of the Fall of stories, so Fall of Bloodshot and Fall of Ninjak, kind of tee up 4001 AD as a story. But actually, they're not as closely nested into that story or as involved in that story as I would have thought. They're nice kind of extra add-ons and tie-ins, but they're not essential. They tie way more into 4001 AD than they do into the Book of Death, to be honest. Anyway, so Book of Death, issue 3, the story continues. Yeah, like I say, it's a decent story, good artwork. I quite like Robert Venditti, and that's the end of that. Then we have 2 one-shots in a row. We have the Fall of Harbinger one-shot, which we have not previously seen in any of the other deluxe editions or trade paperbacks that we've read. So this was an interesting issue. I did quite enjoy it, although it did feel quite rushed towards the end. We then have the Fall of Exo Manowar one-shot, which we have seen in one of our Exo Manowar deluxe editions. Now this does not foreshadow 4001 AD at all. In fact, neither does the Harbinger one. And this isn't really an especially strong issue. It's not bad, but it's not especially strong. Whilst the Harbinger one was, this one is just kind of like, well, it's okay. It's okay. Again, with all those one-shots, all 4 of those, there's no need to read them as reading parts of the Book of Death. They utterly stand alone, largely unrelated. And in fact, the first 2, Bloodshot and Ninjak, are much more closely tied into 4001 as an event than anything to do with the Book of Death, really. And then the latter 2 similarly have nothing to do with the Book of Death and nothing really to do with 4001. So this is the final issue of the Book of Death. This is number 4. Decent issue, interesting antagonist, good story. I'm glad they didn't stretch this out and make this longer than it needs to be. 4 issues is enough. It's actually a very small, relatively intimate story between the Eternal Warrior and this character here, Tama. So I'm glad that they kind of just kept it as small, tight, succinct. The hardcover ends with webcomics. So these are one-page webcomics. They're called Chapter Zero, as you can see here. These are one-page webcomics. I don't know where these were published or released or when, but this is kind of like a prologue to the Book of Death story. So you got one, two, three, four of these one-page webcomics. Utterly non-essential. Don't worry if you haven't read them. Don't worry if you can't find them. And they are set between the Valiant Deluxe Edition and this Deluxe Edition. Okay, we've got the usual gallery at the back, which looks very, very nice indeed. Love this artwork. That redacted thing, which it has here, is very cool. Very cool. I like it. Yeah, standard kind of stuff. Great artwork. Usual sort of Valiant Deluxe Edition quality. In terms of build quality for this is excellent as per usual. The story itself was good. I'm glad I have it in my collection. I'm definitely interested in the story of the Eternal Warrior. Now it ends on a bit of a, I don't want to say cliffhanger, more of a twist, which might make one think that the Eternal Warrior is not going to then be in Valiant or Valiant Comics in a big way from this point on. However, that is not the case, because after the Book of Death, there's a deluxe edition called The Wrath of the Eternal Warrior, which we'll read next time. But before I give you your homework, there is one thing about the Book of Death and the way this was released and printed and so on that I need to discuss separately. So let's switch to that now.
Okay, and if I've edited this correctly, you should have just seen the Book of Death overview of the physical deluxe edition. But before we look at the next deluxe edition we're going to look at next week, which is the Wrath of the Eternal Warrior, what we need to talk about is this four-issue miniseries. So, Legends of the Geomancer is a Book of Death tie-in series, similarly published in 2015, all about the Book of Death and all about geomancers and stuff. But it's not collected in the Book of Death deluxe edition. In fact, it's not collected anywhere, and I mean literally, it's not collected anywhere, not even as a trade paperback. I'll explain that in just a second, but the series itself is written by Fred Van Lente, who is not the person who wrote Book of Death, that is Robert Venditti, and is basically a completely unrelated story to the Book of Death, pretty much. It's about the first ever Geomancer, and I guess in a way it's kind of the first chronological appearance of the three brothers, so Ivar Time Walker, Eternal Warrior, and Armstrong. Um, I'm aware I haven't read any of those as yet, but I've seen enough of the wider Valiant universe and what we've read so far to have an idea that these three brothers exist and who they are. So please don't think I skipped ahead. I haven't. So this is about the first Geomancer and kind of introducing those three brothers. And I suppose it's about how the Book of Death itself, which is a physical book, obviously, got written or created or whatever. But ultimately, it doesn't really feel like it's linked to the Book of Death events, and it doesn't really feel like it's not bad. It's well drawn, and it's an okay story and it's well written. I've got no problem with it at all. It would have been nice to have had it in the Book of Death just for completeness' sake, but is it worth tracking down? I mean, it took me a while, like a while, to track these down. Thankfully, I've got a friend who knows a friend who knows a friend who managed to get them for me, or rather, I borrowed them. Long story short, these are really hard to get because Valiant basically pulled what I call a dick move with this. Um, Essentially, each of these four issues were only made available as physical retailer incentives based on preset ratios to do with pre-orders for the Book of Death miniseries. Basically, in other words, if a retailer, so a local comic book shop, ordered 25 issues of Book of Death number one, they would then get one physical copy of the Legends of the Geomancer. Mental, I know. Um, then similarly for Book of Death issues 2, 3, and 4, which are collected in the deluxe edition, a local comic shop had to order 10 issues of each of those in order to just get one of the Legends of the Geomancer. This is kind of controversial and shitty because it really forces people to go to local comic book shops. And I know Valiant is very much about like physical media and local comic book shops, and I totally get that, but I don't respect it. And the reason I don't respect it is because, and I'm saying this purely as someone who's British, someone who lives in the capital city in the UK, someone in fact who has travelled around the UK going to many comic book shops. Local comic book shops, at least in my country, at least in my experience, fucking suck. Like they're just terrible. The number of comic book shops I go into now, and I'm like, well, I have more comics than this place, and my comics are in way better condition than these brand new comics I'm meant to pay full price for on the shelf. They're overpriced. The staff is rude. They smell weird. I'm not going to go into a rant about local comic book shops, but essentially maybe that's time for have another video on it. But forcing people to go there to pick up these physical variants is kind of a rubbish move. And to say that you're not going to collect it in anything, and thereby forcing people to go to local comic book shops, forcing local comic book shops to order in large numbers simply to get just a couple of these, it's kind of a rubbish move. And as well as that, like the story, it definitely isn't worth the hype. If you've heard amazing things that it's so hard to find, that's just FOMO. That's all that is, fear of missing out. The story is okay. It's totally forgettable. It's non-essential. It's all right. And it would have been nice if it was collected in the Book of Death deluxe edition, but the fact is no great loss. Anyway, just want to bring that to everyone's attention in case you're reading the Book of Death or you're doing like me and trying to do a comprehensive reading order of the entirety of the Valiant universe. This is part of that, but it's an annoying and slightly unnecessary part. And I say it's annoying purely because of the way it was distributed by Valiant Entertainment. Okay, with that mini rant out of the way, and what I will say is that our homework for the, I think, 3 or 4 human beings that are actually following this video series, or for the dozen or so bots that are following, our homework next time is to read the Wrath of the Eternal Warrior Deluxe Edition, which I'm actually kind of looking forward to. So I'll catch everyone on the next video. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.